The final section of this chapter's reading focuses on what I find to be some of the most interesting and fascinating research from social psychology. This is the topic of social conformity. Okay, this is the tendency for us to change our behavior when we're pressured by others or when we're in social situations and people are acting and behaving differently than us. This is a huge area of study in the field of social psychology, and the reading is going to provide some of the main takeaway points that we know from the science on social conformity. Now, in this next section of the content, you'll be exposed to some of the most famous and well-known research studies that have taken place in psychology. They taught us a lot about human nature, but they were also highly unethical and would never be approved to be performed today. It's a result of some of these studies that we have an institutional review board that requires all research to pass a rigorous review to ensure that the participants aren't being harmed or neglected in any way. All of the research studies that you've been taking part in on campus have been carefully reviewed by the University of Arizona IRB, and we know that they're safe for participants to be involved with. Now, the first part of this reading looks at social conformity in terms of compliance. Okay, how do we get people to follow our requests and comply with demands? So if you're going into business or marketing or anything with sales, this will be a really interesting section to look at. It'll talk about what we know about different sales tactics, how to get people to buy products, what are some ways that we can get people to comply with our requests. So very fascinating stuff there. And then moving on further in the reading, we'll look at what we know about obedience. Okay, what makes people obey authority figures or people who are perceived to be authority figures? Now, within this section on obedience are two of the most famous studies in psychology. The first is Milgram's study on obedience, where this took place at Yale, and Milgram, a famous social psychologist, had researchers. They were normal people that were playing the role of a researcher, and they were instructed to deliver electrical shocks. This wasn't really happening, but they thought it was. And the basic aspect of the study was they were seeing how far these subjects would go following the demands of a head scientist, okay, telling them to continue to deliver these shocks to somebody in another room every time they made a mistake on a basic grammar test. Okay, so go ahead and look through that section. You'll see the video, which will show you the entire study. No shocks were actually delivered, but the person that was pulling the shock lever wasn't aware of that. And I think you'll be really surprised to see how far many of these participants went with pulling that lever. I'll also put up a video covering the Stanford prison study. This was a famous study that showed the power of social roles to influence behavior. This was done in a mock prison that was set up in the basement of Stanford in one of the research labs. And the research scientist who ran the study, his name was Phil Zimbardo, and he randomly assigned a group of young, healthy people to either be prisoners or guards in this mock prison. And over the course of several days, they both really fell into their roles in many ways which can be perceived as scary. So you'll really get the full effect by watching the videos, which provide raw footage of these studies. But these are two of the most famous studies looking at the power of obedience and social conformity. And our next essay, one of our final essays in the class, is going to be a reflection on some of these studies. So make sure to review this content. And again, I think it's some of the most interesting stuff that we cover in Intro Psych.